The skiff came down burning, and the first thing Arav made a thought, watching it carve a white scar across the dusk over Bay 17, was that whoever was inside had maybe 4 minutes before the hull cooked their lungs from the inside. He was wrong by about 90 seconds. He'd been on the gantry of the Frontier Hospital station with a cold cup of synth coffee in one hand and the other hand pressed against the cold glass, watching the twin suns drop behind the dust ring, humming under his breath the way he always did when he was too tired to think. It was a tune his mother used to sing to him in their kitchen in Lucknow when he was small, and the power went out and the candles made shadows on the wall. He could not have written down a single word of it. His mouth knew the shape of it, the way his hands knew the shape of a scalpel, the way his feet knew the corridor between Triage 2 and the burn ward without him having to look. Then the alarm went, and the skiff came down and the humming stopped. Dr. Maida. The intercom was a girl's voice, Velen, one of the new triage interns, breath high and tight. Doctor, it's a Korath craft, royal markings. They're demanding a human surgeon. He set the coffee down very carefully on the railing. He did not remember picking it up again. Say that part once more, he said. Royal markings, Dr. Korath House. The transponder code is. She stopped, and he heard her swallow. It's the princess's personal flag. Outside, the skiff had gone still in its cradle, the hull pinging as it shed heat into the cold of the bay. Smoke came up from the seals in pale ribbons. The Korath honor guard was already there, 4 of them, tall as door frames, their carapace armor still flecked with the white ash of high atmosphere. They did not look at the human medics swarming the ramp. They looked through them, the way you look through a window at something more important on the other side. Arav took the lift down 2 floors and walked into the bay with his hands in his coat pockets so they wouldn't shake. 41 years old, 16 years as a trauma surgeon, 8 of those in war zones nobody on Earth would name out loud. He had operated on Korath captives once, in a black-budget facility on Titan, and learned more about their physiology in 3 weeks than the diplomatic corps had learned in 20 years. That was the only reason, he understood now, the only reason in the galaxy, he was about to be allowed to touch a Korath princess. The honor guard parted for him without a word. The ramp was hot through his boots. Inside the skiff, the air smelled of ozone and the faint copper of Korath blood, and there she was on the floor of the cabin, half upright against the bulkhead, with her hand pressed to a wound below her collarbone that should not have been a wound at all. Saravel of House Korath. He had seen her face on 100 news feeds and never imagined seeing it like this. The high silver hair of her caste was matted black at the temples. Her skin, normally the pale green of river jade, had gone the color of old wax. Her eyes, Korath eyes, 4-pupiled, the irises split like a wheel of glass, found him and tried to focus and slid away. There was a thing about humans in the Korath Dominion that Arav had spent the better part of his adult life trying not to think about. The thing was this: they did not matter. Earth was a backwater. Humanity had stumbled into the galactic stage 40 years ago in a slow-drive freighter that the Korath Border Patrol had nearly shot down for trespass, and in the 4 decades since, the official conclave position on the species was that they were industrious, brief, and largely beneath notice. There were 31 client species under the Korath throne. Humanity was not one of them. Humanity was, in the legal language of the conclave, a ward, a category 1 step above a protected wildlife population, and 1 step below a recognized civilization. Arav had read the language once and put the document down and gone for a long walk. That was the room he was walking into now. The princess of the species that did not consider his species a species, and she was looking at him with the dimming eyes of a woman who was running out of minutes, and he found that he did not care in this moment about the legal status of his people. He cared about the bleed. "Don't move her," he said to the honor guard in Korath, which he spoke badly, then again in standard for the medics. "Don't move her. Stretch her under, not over. I want a clean, sterile envelope before we lift." One of the honor guards, the tallest, looked down at him. His name plate read VORKESH in both scripts. His voice, when it came, was a low subharmonic that Arav felt in his teeth before he heard it in his ears. "Human," he said, "if she dies, you die." "Then let me work," Arav said, and knelt down beside the princess of House Korath, and put 2 human fingers against the artery below her jaw, and felt the pulse of an entire galactic dynasty stuttering away beneath his hand. They got her to surgical 3 in 9 minutes, which under any other circumstance would have been good time, and which tonight felt like a slow drowning. Arav scrubbed in beside the intern, Velen, whose hands were shaking so badly he had to take her by the wrists and hold them still for a second. "Breathe," he told her. She's a patient first and a princess never." "Yes, doctor." "Say it back." "Patient first," Velen said. "Princess never." "Good girl." He went in. The wound below the collarbone was not a wound from any weapon he recognized. It was small, no wider than the nail of his little finger, and it should already have closed. Korath physiology ran on a clotting cascade that put human biology to shame, sealed perforations in under a minute. This one had not closed. It had widened. The edges of the puncture were gray at the margins, and when he put the imager on it, the gray was moving, blooming outward through her lymphatic system in slow, soft pulses, the way ink blooms in water. A bioagent, engineered, built specifically for Korath tissue. He looked up at the surgical screen and watched the bloom advance and felt something very cold settle behind his sternum. He had seen things like this twice before. Both times the patient had died inside 6 hours. He started to hum, very quietly, his mother's tune. He did not notice he was doing it. "Doctor," Velen said, "heard there's someone outside. He says he's coming in." "Tell him no." "Doctor, he's—" The doors hissed open behind him. Arav did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the screen, on the slow gray bloom. "Get out of my surgical suite," he said. "You will address me," said a voice behind him, "or you will die where you kneel." "I'm not kneeling," Arav said. "I'm standing, and you can either get out or you can put on a sterile gown and shut up, but you cannot stay in those clothes." He turned then, just his head. The Korath in the doorway was younger than the honor guard, taller still, and he was wearing the pale gray of a house warlord consort, which Arav recognized only because he had spent a long night 3 years ago in a library trying not to fall asleep over Korath heraldry. His skin was the deep emerald of the high caste, his hair shaved close, and a thin scar ran from the corner of his left eye down into his collar. He did not look afraid. He looked annoyed, the way a man looks annoyed when his train is late. "I am Thurin-Vi of House Drael," the man said. "I am betrothed to the woman on that table. By the contracts of the conclave, I have right of presence." "By the contracts of my surgical suite," Arav said, "you have right of stepping outside." "Human," Thurin-Vi's voice did not rise. It went the other way, soft, almost gentle. "You are very small and very brief. I would prefer not to remember your name." "Dr. Arav Maida," Arav said. "Maida with an H. Try to keep it straight. You'll be needing it later." He turned back to his patient. Behind him there was a long silence. Then the doors hissed shut. Thurin-Vi had not come in. Arav did not know whether that was respect, or whether the warlord consort had simply decided to let the human exhaust himself before disposing of him at leisure. Either way, he had work. He stood for a moment with his back to the closed doors and his eyes on the surgical screen, and he let himself, for 3 breaths, be afraid. He had a rule about being afraid. He had built the rule in his 2nd year of residency, after his first patient died on him. A man named Iqbal, 54, a fall from a scaffolding, and Arav had been so frightened the whole 26 minutes of the resuscitation that he had done everything right and nothing well. And afterward the attending had taken him out into the corridor and said, "Son, You are allowed to be afraid for exactly the count of 3. 3 breaths, in and out, and then the fear goes back in the drawer and you do the next thing. He had used the rule for 16 years. He used it now. 1, 2, 3. He put the fear back in the drawer. He went to work. The next 4 hours were the worst of his career, and he had a list. The gray bloom moved. He chased it. He flushed her lymph with a saline he formulated on the fly, cutting it with 2 compounds he'd seen the Korath use on Titan, and a third he made up from first principles because he had to. He went in twice through the puncture, the second time with a probe so fine it was essentially a hair, and pulled out 3 threads of something that looked like glass and was not glass. He sent them to the lab. The lab sent back 11 minutes later a single line of text. We do not know what this is. He kept working. At hour 3, the princess's heart's Korath have 2, set in a single sack, went arrhythmic, and he had to crack her sternum, and Velen, gods bless her, did not flinch. He massaged the upper heart with his gloved hand, with his bare human hand inside a Korath chest cavity, and he felt the muscle answer him under his fingers like a frightened animal calming. He had been told, in his 2nd year of residency, by an attending who had served in 3 wars, that there was a particular thing that happened to a doctor's hands the first time they held a beating heart. The attending had said, "You will think it is going to feel like meat, and it is not going to feel like meat, and you will not be ready for what it does feel like, and the only advice I can give you is to keep your face very still while it happens." Arav had thought at the time that the attending was being dramatic. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about it the first time, with a 40-year-old farmer in a field hospital outside Khartoum, and he was wrong about it again now, with his hand around the upper heart of the princess of House Korath, and he kept his face very still because there was a Korath field nurse 3 feet away from him who was watching, and there was, somewhere behind him in the observation gallery, a warlord consort who had promised to kill him slowly. And the heart in his hand was the heart in his hand, and it answered him, and it kept beating, and he kept his face very still. He hummed his mother's tune. He did not know he was doing it. At hour 4 the bloom slowed. It did not stop, but it slowed. He had bought her, he estimated, between 9 and 11 hours. Maybe 12 if she was strong, and she was strong, this princess, stronger than anyone in the room except the human kneeling beside her with his hand in her chest. He closed her up. He stripped off his gloves. He walked out of the surgical suite and into the antechamber and looked at the wall for 30 seconds without seeing it. Then he turned around and went to find the warlord consort, because somebody had to tell him that the princess of House Korath was going to die before sunrise, and Arav Maida was not going to let her. But the warlord consort was not alone. In the wide observation chamber above the surgical bay, Thurinvi of House Drael stood with his back to the glass, his hands clasped behind him, and beside him stood a Korath so old that his skin had gone the color of dried tea leaves, and the 4 pupils in his eyes had clouded over to a soft milk. The old one wore the gold cord of a house oracle, a reader of the wheel, and across his palms he held an object that made Arav stop in the doorway and forget, for 1 full second, how to breathe. It was a disc, circular, the size of a dinner plate. The rim worked in a script so old it predated the Korath migration from their birth world. The face of it was obsidian black, and across that black face there moved, very faintly, threads of pale silver, the way clouds move across the face of a moon. He had read about these. He had read about these the way a child reads about dragons, the mirror of Vale, the wheel glass, a Korath reliquary that, according to every Korath text Arav had ever skimmed, did not exist anymore, had not existed for 2,000 years, had been a story the Korath told themselves about a time when their priests could look into the wheel of possibility and see which spokes would turn. "Dr. Maida," said Thurinvi without turning around, "the reader has cast for her." "That's nice," Arav said. "I'd like a word." "He has cast for her 3 times, Thurenvai went on, as if Erev had not spoken. She dies in 11 hours. The wheel will not turn another way. The reader is never wrong. I don't care what your priest saw, Erev said. I care about what's in front of me. There's a difference. Now listen, that bioagent in her bloodstream was engineered. Somebody made that. Somebody who knew Korath lymphatic physiology down to the molecular level made that, and somebody put it into her, and you need to. Doctor. The old reader spoke. His voice was very soft and very tired. Doctor, come and look. Erev did not want to look. He wanted to walk out of the room and back into his surgical suite and put his hand back into the princess's chest where things made sense. He wanted to find the lab tech who had written "We do not know what this is" and shake her until she did know. He came and looked. The reader tilted the disc. The silver threads on its black face stilled, and then they began to draw together, the way iron filings draw together on a piece of paper above a magnet, and they made a shape. The shape was a wheel with 11 spokes. One of the spokes was longer than the others, and at the end of that longest spoke there was a small, still point of light, and the light, Erev understood with a slow, sick feeling in his gut, was Saravel. The reader turned the disc a fraction. The wheel turned. The spoke that was the princess shortened, and the point of light winked out. In every casting, the reader said, she dies. In every spoke of the wheel, there is no path on which she lives. There is no future that we can find. Erev looked at the disc for a long time. Then he looked at the reader. Sir, he said in his best, most careful Korath. Sir, with respect to your office and your age and your great learning, your wheel is a wheel of futures. I am a doctor. I work in the present tense. I do not need your wheel to tell me what is coming. I need my hands and a clean field and 4 hours of nobody bothering me. Human, said the reader very gently, the wheel does not lie. Maybe not, Erev said, but it doesn't operate either. He turned to Thurenvai. I need to move her, he said. I need to get her into a controlled, sterile environment off this station. The bioagent is consuming her lymphatic chain faster than I can flush it. I need a Class 1 isolation theater. The nearest one is on Korath Prime at the High Spire. That is a 14-hour transit, said Thurenvai. Then we don't take a ship, we take the line. Thurenvai went very still. The spine, Erev said, the royal maglev, from the orbital tether down through the atmosphere to the high spire. 3 hours, maybe 2.5 if your driver has a spine of his own. I want her on it. I want her on it inside the next 40 minutes. The spine, said Thurenvai softly, is a ceremonial line. It is used for coronations, for weddings. It does not carry. It will carry her, said the reader. Both of them turned to him. The old Korath held the disc up to his clouded eyes and looked at it without seeing it, the way old men look at things that are not really in front of them anymore. The wheel shows me a train, he said. The wheel has been showing me a train for 3 days. I did not know what train. Now I know. He lowered the disc and looked at Erev, and Erev had the unpleasant sensation of being looked at not by an old man, but by something much older and much more patient. You will fail, doctor, the reader said kindly. The wheel does not lie, but you may go and try if you wish. Yeah, said Erev, I wish. They put her on the spine at the 8th hour. It was a thing of bone-white alloy and dark glass, the royal maglev, 11 cars long, the kind of object that had been built for processions and not for emergencies. The Korath called it the spine because it ran the full length of the continent below, the gravitic rails laid down 4,000 years ago by an emperor whose name nobody could pronounce anymore. The first car was the engine. The 11th car was the royal chamber. They put Saravel in the 11th car because tradition demanded it, and Arav set up his field theater in the 10th because tradition could go to hell. He had with him Velen, who refused to leave, a Korath field nurse named Isaren who had served 2 combat tours on the Bell Rift, and who had the deep stillness of someone who had stopped being afraid of dying a long time ago. 6 crates of equipment he had stripped from Bay 17. The reader, who came aboard without being asked and sat in a corner of the 10th car with the obsidian disc in his lap. And Thurin Vi of House Drail, who stood in the doorway of the 11th car with his hands behind his back and watched. The spine left the tether at the 8th hour and 17 minutes. The acceleration was so smooth Arav did not feel it begin. He felt only the slow shift of the light through the dark glass as the maglev dropped into the upper atmosphere, and the stars smeared sideways and then became sky. In the 10th car, he opened his crates. "Talk to me," he said to Isaren, who had been watching Saravel's vitals on the field monitor. "Talk to me about what you have on this train that I can use." "Doctor," said Isaren, "the spine has a reactor." "Tell me about the reactor." "A Veil-class containment loop, 3 meters across. It runs the gravitics." "Power output?" 6 gigawatts continuous, 11 at peak." "Is the coolant loop water?" "Coolant is liquid lithium." "Can you bypass it?" Isaren considered him. Her 4 pupils had widened slightly. "Doctor," she said, "you wish to bypass the coolant on a Veil-class reactor while it is in motion at half-orbital velocity." "No," Arav said. "I want to tap the coolant. I want a side stream, about 100 liters a minute. I want it fed through a heat exchanger into a saline bath, and I want the saline bath wired into a dialysis loop into the princess's circulatory system." There was a silence. "Doctor," said Isaren very carefully, "the bioagent in her bloodstream is a designed molecule. It is encoded to bind to Korath lymphocytes. There is no dialysis filter in the galaxy that can." "There is no filter," Arav said. "I'm going to make one." "From what?" "From her." Isaren stared at him. "I'm going to spin her own plasma," Arav said. "I'm going to centrifuge it, isolate the lymphocytes the agent has already bound to, and I'm going to use those lymphocytes, the dying ones, the marked ones, as a binding substrate to pull the rest of the free agent out of her circulation. I'm going to use the disease against itself. I need centrifugal force I don't have, and I need cooling I don't have. The reactor coolant gives me both. The maglev spin gives me both. This whole train is a centrifuge if you tilt it right." "Doctor," said Isaren slowly, "that has never been done." "It's been done," Arav said, "just not on a Korath." "Where?" "On a 14-year-old human girl on a refugee transport in the Sutter Belt in 47. I was the second assist. The first assist's name was Dr. Kavya Evir. She wrote it up, but the paper was classified because of where we were operating. The girl lived." Isaren looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, the brief sharp nod of a Korath field officer accepting an order. "I will get you your side stream, Doctor." "Thank you." She left. He turned to Velen, who was staring at him with very wide eyes. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "I need you to set up the centrifuge cradle. The princess goes head down for this, 10 degrees off horizontal. We brace her. We pad her. We do it now." "Doctor," Velen said, "is this going to work?" He stopped. He looked at the girl. She was 23. She had grown up in a refugee camp on Mars. She had clawed her way through 3 scholarships to get to the surgical program on the station. And tonight she was on a Korath royal train going half-orbital across a planet she had never set foot on, with her hands inside a princess. "Velen," he said, "I don't know, I think so, I hope so, but here's the thing, I'm not doing this because I know it'll work. I'm doing this because she's in front of me and she's dying and I'm a doctor. That's the whole job, that's all there ever is." "Yes, doctor." "Set up the cradle." "Yes, doctor." He turned away. He turned away because if he looked at Velen one more second he was going to start crying, and he could not afford to start crying yet. He had not earned it yet. The patient was still alive. In the doorway between the 10th and 11th car, Thur and Vi of House Drayle had not moved. "Dr. Maida," the warlord consort said. "What? If she dies on this train?" "She's not dying on this train." "If she dies on this train," Thur and Vi went on, as if he had not been interrupted, "I will see you killed slowly. I want you to understand that. I want you to be carrying that with you while you work." Arev looked at him. "Thur and Vi," he said, "I want you to understand something too." "Yes." "I don't care." He turned back to his patient. He worked for 90 minutes without lifting his head. He cracked open the access panel on the floor of the 10th car and ran a coolant side stream up through the deck plating, wrapped in flexible jacketing he had cut from a Korath medical insulator. The line hissed when he opened the valve. The lithium ran clear and silver. He used it to chill a stainless basin he had filched from the train's galley, and in the basin he laid out his improvised dialysis circuit, every connection sealed with surgical adhesive because there was no time to do it properly. Isaren did not say anything when she watched him crimp a fitting with his teeth. Velen patted the princess into the cradle and tilted her 10 degrees off horizontal and braced her with her head toward the front of the train, so that the maglev's slight forward acceleration would do the work of the centrifuge he didn't have. He ran the femoral line. He ran the return line. He started the loop at 30 milliliters a minute and brought it up slowly, watching the pressures, watching the color of her plasma and the line shift from gray-blue to something cleaner, a little cleaner, only a little. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough almost as soon as he started it. The agent in her blood was binding faster than he was pulling it. He could see it on the monitor. The gray was still blooming, slowed but not stopped, and he was going to lose her. He was going to lose her in this train, in this stupid bone-white ceremonial coffin of a train. And Thur and Vi of House Drayle was going to watch him lose her, and then he was going to die slowly the way Thur and Vi had promised. He sat back on his heels. He let out a breath. Isaren came up beside him and crouched on her haunches the way Korath field officers did when they had been on their feet too long. She did not say anything for a moment. She watched the monitor with him. She watched the slow gray advance. "Doctor," she said finally, "may I tell you a thing about my people?" "Tell me." "We do not believe that fate is fixed. That is a misunderstanding of our religion that is common among off-worlders. We believe that the wheel turns. We believe that the wheel can be read. We do not believe that the wheel cannot be touched." The reader said. "The reader is very old. The reader has been reading for 60 years. In 60 years a man comes to believe that what he has seen is what there is. That is a hazard of his office. It is not a hazard of mine." She looked at him. "I have seen humans before, Doctor. I served on the Bell Rift. Your kind were on the other side. We took prisoners. I treated them. I have seen what humans do when they are told a thing cannot be done. And what do? They do not listen." He smiled. He could not help it. It was a small, tired smile, but it was a smile. "That's about right," he said. "So I will not tell you that this cannot be done, Doctor. I will tell you that I am here. I will tell you that the field nurse on the Bell Rift kept her tools clean for 19 years on the chance that one day she would need them for something that mattered. I will tell you that today appears to be that day. Whatever you need, Doctor. Whatever you ask, ask." He looked at her. He did not know what to say. He nodded. She nodded back, the brief sharp Korath nod, and went back to the rear of the car to keep watching the lab kit. He sat for a moment longer on his heels. He thought about the man Iqbal who had died on him in his second year. He thought about Kavya Itter in the Sutter Belt, her hands inside a refugee girl's chest cavity with a centrifuge improvised from a busted hand crank generator. He thought about his mother in the kitchen with the candles lit and the power out. He thought, there is always a thing you have not tried yet. He just had to find it. "Doctor," said the reader, from the corner where he had been sitting silent for an hour with the obsidian disc in his lap. "Doctor, would you like to look?" "No. It might help you." "It will not help me." "With respect, sir." "As you wish." But the old Korath turned the disc anyway gently on his knee, and the silver threads on its black face moved, and Arav looked despite himself. Because the human eye goes to motion the way a moth goes to flame, and there in the disc he saw a desert. A flat white desert under a black sky, and in the center of the desert a circular pool of water, perfectly round, the surface so still it looked solid. And kneeling beside the pool was a figure he did not at first recognize because the figure was kneeling with its head down. Then the figure looked up. It was him. It was Arav Maida, kneeling beside a circle of water in a desert under a black sky, and the man in the disc was weeping, and in his arms he held something wrapped in white cloth, and the something was very still. Arav looked away. "Sir," he said, and his voice was steady, which surprised him. "Sir, take that thing out of my surgical theater." "Doctor, take it out." The reader rose slowly with the dignity of the very old. He bowed to Arav. He carried the disc out of the 10th car into the 9th. Arav put his hands on his knees. He breathed. He listened to the hum of the maglev under the floor of the train, the deep low frequency of the gravitics, and he listened to the softer hum of Saravel's monitor, and he listened to his own breath, and after a moment he listened to the third hum, which he was making himself, which he had been making for an hour without noticing. His mother's tune. He stopped. He went very still. He listened to the tune in his head, the way it bent at the end of the third phrase, the small descending interval she used to do when she was singing it slow. And he thought, harmonics. He thought, that's harmonics, that's a wave, two waves interfering, that's what the bind is. The agent isn't a chemical lock on the lymphocyte, it's a resonance. It's a vibration in the protein folding. It's matching the Korath lymphocyte's natural folding frequency. That's why no chemical inhibitor touches it. You don't break a resonance with a chemical. You break a resonance with another resonance. He stood up. "Isarn," he said, "how sensitive is a Korath lymphocyte to acoustic stimulation?" She stared at him. "Doctor." Quick answer, yes or no. Have you ever in your career seen a Korath cell respond to vibration? "Yes," she said. "We use ultrasonic disruption in burn therapy." "At what frequency?" 2.1 megahertz. "And the agent, the binding pattern, what's the protein folding frequency of a Korath lymphocyte?" She looked at the monitor. She tapped through 3 menus. She read off the number. 1.05 megahertz. He laughed. He could not help it. He put his hand over his mouth. "It's a doubling," he said. "It's a harmonic. The agent binds at the second harmonic of the lymphocyte's own folding frequency. That's how it's targeting. It's not chemistry, it's music." He turned to the cradle. "I need an ultrasonic emitter," he said. "I need it tunable. I need it now. I'm going to play her cells a counter frequency. I'm going to detune the binding. I'm going to shake the agent loose." "Doctor," said Isarn, "if you miscalculate by 1/10 of a hertz, then she dies." "Yes." "She's already dying." "Yes." "Get me the emitter." Isarn got him the emitter. He worked it through. He set the emitter at 1.05 megahertz minus a sliver, a frequency he chose by ear, by feel, by the same instinct that let him pick out the third in a chord on his mother's old harmonium when he was 9 years old. He brought it up slowly. He watched the monitor. He watched the gray bloom in her lymphatic chain. He hummed under his breath without knowing he was doing it. The bloom slowed. The bloom stopped. The bloom began, very slowly, to recede. He had to sit down. He sat down on the deck of the 10th car of the Royal Maglev, in his bloody surgical apron, with his back against the cradle of the princess of House Korath, and he put his head down on his knees, and he laughed in a way that was not quite laughing. Velen was crying quietly, standing over the monitor with one hand pressed to her mouth. Isaren, the Korath field nurse who had stopped being afraid of dying a long time ago, knelt down beside Arev and put one large green hand very lightly on his shoulder. Korath do not touch outside the family. He did not know what to do with it. He left it. In the doorway of the 11th car, Thurin Vi of House Drael had not moved. The reader of the wheel came back into the 10th car slowly with the obsidian disc in his hands. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the princess. He looked at the disc. The silver threads on the obsidian face were still. They were still in a way. They had not been still in 3 days. Dr. Maida, the reader said very softly. The wheel has stopped. That's nice, Arev said into his knees. I have never, said the reader, in 60 years of casting seen the wheel stop. That's nice. You have broken the wheel, Doctor. I didn't break it, Arev said. I just wasn't on it. He lifted his head. He looked up at the old Korath. I don't live in the future, sir, he said. I live in the room. That's the whole trick. That's the only trick I've got. The future's a wheel. The room is a room. You can do something about the room. The reader looked at him for a long time. His clouded eyes did not move. Then slowly, he did something that Arev, in all his reading on Korath custom, had never seen described, never heard mentioned, never imagined. The old Korath lowered himself to his knees on the deck of the 10th car of the Royal Maglev, and he set the obsidian disc down in front of him, and he pressed his forehead to the metal floor. Sir, said Arev, alarmed. Sir, please get up, sir, you can't. You will not understand, the reader said into the floor. You are very young. You will not understand for a long time what you have done, but it has been done and I have seen it done, and that is enough. The train hummed on through the night. There was a thing Arev did not yet know, and the thing was this. The agent in Saravel's bloodstream had not come from a stranger. It had been engineered, 16 months earlier, in a black laboratory 2 systems over, by a geneticist on the personal payroll of House Drael. The geneticist had been very good at her work. She had been paid in land and titles and a marriage contract for her son. She had built the agent to mimic a natural Korath autoimmune syndrome, so that when the princess died, as she would, on the wedding train, in the arms of her grieving betrothed, the conclave would record the death as illness and not as murder, and House Drael would inherit by widowers right the entirety of the Korath succession claim, and the war that the Drael had wanted for 60 years would become the war they were owed. Arev did not know this, but he would know it inside the next 4 minutes, because while he was sitting on the floor of the 10th car with his back against the cradle, and the reader of the wheel was bowed at his feet, the agent recovered from the centrifuge had been working its way through the lab kit Isaren had set up at the rear of the car, and the molecular signature was now on the screen, and Isaren was looking at it, and her 4 pupils had gone the cold pale of Korath fury. Doctor, she said. What? You should come and see this. He came and saw. He had seen, in his 16 years, 3 engineered bioagents. One of them in a refugee camp on Mars, where it had killed 71 children before he and Kavya Iver worked out the antidote in a tent under a single bulb. One of them in a Korath detention facility on Titan, where he had not been allowed to treat the patients but had been allowed to autopsy them. One of them in a black-budget briefing on Earth, where a colonel he did not like had shown him a slide of a molecule and told him that if he ever saw it in the field, he was to walk away and forget he had seen it. The signature on the screen in front of him was the 3rd one. The Drael molecule. He had seen it on a slide. He had never expected to see it in a patient. He certainly had never expected to see it in the patient of the man standing in the doorway of the 11th car who had promised to kill him slowly. He looked very carefully at Isaren. You're sure, he said. I am sure. You're sure. Doctor, I have been a Korath field nurse for 19 years. I am sure. Okay. He stood up. He turned around. He walked, in his bloody surgical apron, the length of the 10th car, and he stopped in the open doorway between the 10th and the 11th, and he looked Thurenvai of House Drael in the eye. Get off this train, he said. Thurenvai blinked. Once. I beg your pardon. Get off this train at the next station. Walk off, or I'll have Isaren throw you off. Human. I have a molecular signature on a screen back there, Arav said, and the molecular signature is yours, your house, your geneticist, your weapon. I have a Korath field nurse who can read it and who has seen it. I have a reader of the wheel who has just declared, in front of 2 witnesses, that the wheel has stopped. I have a patient who is going to live. And I have a comms uplink to the Korath Court Justiciary, and in about 90 seconds I'm going to use it. So you can get off this train now, or you can stay on it. But if you stay on it, I want you to understand that the train you are on is the one that ends with your house dissolved, and your name struck from the conclave rolls. Thurenvai of House Drael went very still. The silence in the doorway stretched out long enough that Arav heard, distinctly, the hum of the maglev under the floor and his own heart in his ears. Then Thurenvai's hand moved toward his belt. Isaren shot him. She shot him very quickly, very cleanly, with the small Korath field weapon she had been carrying all night, and which Arav had not realized she was carrying. The bolt took Thurenvai in the shoulder and spun him half around, and he went down on one knee in the doorway of the 11th car, and his hand opened, and the small dark object that had been in it, a needle, Arav saw, a needle full of something Arav did not want to think about, fell from his fingers and rolled across the deck plate. Doctor, said Isaren mildly, I apologize, I should have searched him at the platform. It's fine, Arav said, his voice was very small. It's fine, Isaren. Should I shoot him again? No. Are you certain? I'm certain. She lowered the weapon. Thurenvai of House Drael knelt in the doorway with his hand pressed to his shoulder and his teeth bared, and he looked up at Arav with the look of a man who had just understood, several minutes too late, what kind of room he was in. Take him to the 8th car, Arav said to Isaren. Lock the door. The justiciary can collect him at the high spire. Yes, doctor. She took him. Arav stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back to his patient. He sat down on the deck beside the cradle of Saravel of House Korath, and he watched the slow, steady rhythm of the monitor, and he listened to the hum of the maglev, and he listened, after a while, to the soft sound of the princess breathing on her own. Her 4 pupils flickered behind her closed eyelids. She did not wake. Not yet. She would wake at the high spire in a clean room with her father standing at the foot of the bed and 1,000 questions to answer. But she breathed. She breathed steady. She breathed on her own. Arav put his head down on the edge of the cradle, very gently, so as not to jolt her. He hummed his mother's tune. He fell asleep that way. The spine arrived at the high spire at the 11th hour and 4 minutes, just before dawn. Arav was woken by Velen, who shook his shoulder very gently. He blinked. He had drooled slightly on the edge of the cradle. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Doctor, Velen whispered. Doctor, the king is on the platform. Yeah, he said. Of course he is. He stood up. He straightened his apron, which did not help, because the apron was beyond help. He ran his hand through his hair, which also did not help. He looked at Saravel, who was still asleep, who was still breathing, whose color had come up from the wax bale to something that was almost river jade again, and he thought, all right, all right. He walked to the door of the 11th car. It opened. The platform of the high spire was a vast disk of pale stone under a dome of dark glass, and as the spine slid into its cradle, the first light of dawn was coming through the dome in long pale shafts. The platform was lined with the Korath honor guard, hundreds of them in their carapace armor, their heads bowed. Beyond the honor guard stood the high court, the conclave dignitaries, the heads of the great houses, the diplomatic envoys of 9 other species, and beyond them on a low dais stood the king. Torvale Korath, the lion of the spire, 4,000 years of dynasty stacked behind him like vertebrae. He was very old, he was very tall, he had the same 4-pupilled eyes as his daughter, except his were the color of a banked fire. Erev walked down the ramp. His boots rang on the pale stone. He stopped in front of the dais. He did not know what the protocol was. He had not had time to learn it. He bowed awkwardly the way a human bows, and he said in his bad Korath, "Your Majesty, your daughter is alive. She is sleeping. She will wake. The agent is neutralized." The king looked at him for a very long time. Then the king of the Korath, the lion of the spire, the 4,000-year throne, walked down the 3 steps of his dais and stood in front of Erev Maida of Lucknow and Mars and the Frontier Hospital Station, and he said, in standard, "Doctor, tell me everything." Erev told him. He told him about the skiff coming down burning, about the bloom in the lymphatic chain, about the reader and the wheel, about Thur and Vi in the doorway, about the resonance and the harmonic and his mother's tune, about the molecular signature and Isaren's hand on the field weapon. He told it as plainly as he could. He left things out. He did not leave the important things out. The king listened without moving. When Erev was done, the king turned his head slightly, and one of the honor guard stepped forward, and the honor guard was Vorkesh, the tall one from the bay 17 hours ago, and Vorkesh bowed to the king and said something low in high Korath that Erev did not catch. The king nodded. Then the king of the Korath turned back to Erev, and he did the thing that in the days afterward would be the thing they spoke of, in the conclave and the news feeds and the diplomatic cables of 9 species. They would speak of other things, the exposure of House Drael, the dissolution of the betrothal, the trial, the conviction, the breaking of the Drael claim. But this was the thing that stopped the galaxy. The king of the Korath knelt. He knelt down on one knee on the pale stone of the high spire, in front of a human in a bloody apron, and the honor guard knelt with him, and the conclave dignitaries knelt, and the heads of the great houses knelt, and the diplomatic envoys of 9 other species, after a moment of pure shock, knelt also, because the only thing more unthinkable than the king of the Korath kneeling was being the one species still standing when he did. And then the king spoke. "By the naming right," he said, in high Korath slowly, so that the translation matrices of every species in the chamber could carry it, "which is mine to grant, and which has not been granted in 2,400 years." A sound went through the platform. Not a sound, the absence of a sound. A breath held by 1,000 throats. "I name this human Korath Vi, blood son of the spire, of my house, of my line." Erev did not understand for a moment. Then he did understand, and he wished he didn't. "Your Majesty," he said, "Your Majesty, no, I'm a doctor, I'm not." "And by the naming right," the king went on, as if Erev had not spoken, "I declare the species of Earth, humanity, the small and brief, kin blood to the Korath throne, no longer client, no longer ward, kin, by blood, by the line of the spire, by the breath of my daughter which was given back to her by his hand." The breath came out of the platform in one long, ragged exhalation. Somewhere very far away, in the diplomatic gallery, a Vresani envoy fainted, which is something Vresani had not done in recorded history. Erev stood on the pale stone with his hands at his sides, and he understood in a slow, sick way what the king had just done. The Korath throne had 31 client species and 400 wards. None of them were kin. Kin was a category of 1. Kin was the Korath themselves, and the king had just walked humanity in one sentence across a line that 2,400 years of diplomacy had not budged. Humanity, royal blood by Korath law, forever. The galaxy was, in that moment, a different galaxy than it had been a moment before. Arev did not know what to say. He said the only thing he could think of. "Your Majesty," he said, "I'd like to check on my patient." The king looked at him. And then the king of the Korath, the lion of the spire, the 4,000-year throne, did the second unthinkable thing of the morning. He smiled. It was a small smile, a tired smile, the smile of an old man who had not slept and who had been told, against every prophecy of his reader and every reading of his wheel, that his daughter was going to live. "Of course, Korathvi," he said, "of course, go and check on your patient." But the cables went out before he reached the lift. Later, much later, the historians would write about the 18 minutes between the king's declaration on the platform of the high spire and the moment the first wire feed broke containment in the Vresani sector. 18 minutes was nothing. 18 minutes was the time it took a Korath honor guard to escort a tired human doctor up 4 levels of a tower, and in those 18 minutes the galaxy bent. The Vresani envoy who had fainted on the platform was carried, still unconscious, to her quarters, and her aide, a junior attaché who had been on the job for 6 weeks, sent a single encoded burst to the Vresani conquered that said only the KHORETH have named the human's blood. The Vresani conquered, when it received the message, took the unprecedented step of putting it before the inner ring in active session, which had not been convened for an active matter in 11 years. The Drael delegation tried to flee the platform and was politely, immovably, prevented from leaving by the Korath honor guard. 3 other houses with old ties to Drael went very still and very quiet and began, within the hour, the slow, careful work of pretending they had never met a Drael in their lives. The conclave called an emergency session for the following dawn. The Earth ambassador to the Korath court, a woman named Priya Okonkwo, who had been 3 months into what she had assumed was a slow ceremonial posting, was awakened by her chief of staff at the 6th hour and told that the situation had changed. She asked how it had changed. The chief of staff said, "Ma'am, I do not have the words." She came down to her office in slippers and a hastily knotted robe and read the cables and sat down very slowly in her chair and said, in English, the way she did when she was rattled, "Oh my God." On Earth, when the news reached the day side, the markets did things that markets had not done in 50 years. Several governments issued statements before they knew what to put in the statements. A woman in Lucknow, watering her plants on the balcony of her flat, received a call from a journalist who wanted to know if she was the mother of the new Korathvi, and she said, in Hindi, "I beg your pardon, my son is a doctor," and then she hung up and went back to her plants because she did not believe a word of it. Arev heard about none of this for several hours. He went up to the high white room and he sat in the chair beside the bed, and he watched the slow, steady rise and fall of Saravel's chest, and he listened to the soft hum of the medical equipment, and he hummed his mother's tune very quietly under his breath without knowing he was doing it. She woke at the 9th hour of the morning. Arev was sitting beside her bed in a high white room with a window that looked out over the spire, and he had been sitting there for 2 hours, because every time he tried to leave somebody knelt to him, and he was tired of being knelt to, and the only place where nobody knelt to him was the chair beside her bed. Her 4 pupils opened, they focused, they found him. "You," she said, her voice was very small. "You were the human in the skiff." "I was the human in the skiff." "You hummed." He looked at her. "You hummed," she said again. "I heard it when you had your hand in my chest, you were humming." He did not know what to say. "What was it?" she said. "It was," he stopped. He had not had to explain it to anyone before. "It was something my mother used to sing when I was small. She didn't write songs, she just had songs. There was one she sang when the lights went out in the summer when the grid couldn't keep up and the candles were lit and we would sit in the kitchen. I don't know the words anymore. I just know the shape of it. Saravel of House Korath looked at him with her four-pupiled eyes for a long time. Sing me the shape of it, she said. He laughed. Princess. Korath Vi, she corrected very gravely. I am told you are now bloodkin. I am told you are now technically my brother. I am told the galaxy is in considerable disarray about this. The least you can do is sing. He sang her the shape of it. He sang it under his breath, the way his mother had sung it, the small descending interval at the end of the third phrase, the slight catch on the fifth. He sang it badly. He sang it through. She closed her eyes, she listened. When he was done, she opened her eyes again, and she said, very seriously, That is a very good song, brother. Princess. Sister. Saravel. Yes, brother. Go to sleep. Yes, brother. She slept. He sat in the chair beside her bed in the high white room, and outside the window the dawn was full on the spire, and somewhere far below in the diplomatic galleries, the envoys of 9 species were sending frantic encoded cables back to their homeworlds about the new shape of the galaxy. And somewhere on the 8th car of the spine, Thurin Vi of House Drael was being unloaded in irons. And somewhere on the Frontier Hospital station, a girl named Velen was sleeping for the first time in 26 hours. And somewhere very far away on Earth, his mother was probably watering her plants on the balcony of her flat in Lucknow with no idea at all, that her tune had just rewritten a galactic dynasty. He thought very briefly about what came next. He thought about the conclave session at dawn and the cables to Earth, and the title he had not asked for and did not want and could not give back. He thought about the species that, by the king's word, was no longer a ward. He thought about the children in the refugee camp on Mars who would grow up in a galaxy where their passports read kin and not client, and he did not know yet whether that was a gift or a weight, and he suspected, in the tired part of him that knew things, that it would turn out to be both. He thought about the wheel. He thought about the reader bowing on the deck of the maglev, his forehead to the metal floor, saying, "You have broken the wheel," and Arev had said, "I didn't break it, I just wasn't on it." And he thought, sitting in the chair beside the bed of the Princess of the Korath, that this was perhaps the only true thing he had ever said about being human. They were not, his people, particularly clever. They were not particularly strong. They had no special gift for foresight, no oracles, no obsidian discs. What they had was a habit, stubborn as a weed in a sidewalk crack, of doing the next thing in front of them, of not being on the wheel, of being in the room. Saravel breathed beside him, slow and steady. He closed his eyes. Arev Maida closed his eyes. He hummed very softly under his breath. He did not know he was doing it. He never had.